Miss Sutton had worked the county clerk's desk for 31 years, and she had seen the Millhaven council chamber fill with noise for every reason under the sun. A disputed fence line, a zoning argument over a feed store, a retired teacher who showed up every March to complain about the condition of the river road. But the Thursday evening Harlan Cross stood at the podium with his folder of papers and his lawyer in a pressed gray suit. Me felt the room shift the way a river shifts before a flood. Quiet, then very, very still. Owen Marsh sat in the second row with his daughter Nora pressed against his side. The girl was 9, small for her age, with her grandfather's wide-set eyes. She had brought a library book about birds, but it lay closed on her lap. She was watching the man at the podium the way children watch something they don't have words for yet. Owen himself looked the way he always looked: work boots, canvas jacket, hands that never quite came clean of the trade. He had inherited the parcel from his grandfather Thomas 5 years ago, 2.5 acres on the river's east bend, the old workshop still standing, the deed in a cedar box under his bed. Thomas had told him to hold it. Owen had held it. He'd raised Nora on it after her mother left, built her a tire swing off the big oak, kept the workshop going with small repair jobs and whatever the season sent his way. It wasn't much, but it was the only thing in Owen Marsh's life that had never moved. Harlan Cross did not look at Owen when he spoke. He addressed the council the way men address a room they have already decided belongs to them. The Marsh parcel sits at the center of the River Bend Corridor project, Cross said, turning a page. The assessed value is outdated by 11 years. There is an outstanding tax lien from the estate transfer that was never properly discharged. Our attorneys have documented this fully. He set the folder on the podium with the flat certainty of a man laying down a winning hand. We are asking the council to initiate foreclosure proceedings and assign the parcel to the Corridor Trust pending remediation. Me watched the council members pass the folder around. She watched 2 of them nod before they'd read the 3rd page. Owen stood. He was not a man who spoke often in rooms like this, and the room felt it, that particular silence that falls when someone stands who doesn't stand easily. He said the lien had been paid, that he had the receipt from the county office dated 4 years ago, that he'd filed it himself on a Tuesday in February, and the woman behind the desk had stamped it twice. He said it calmly, without heat. The council chairman, a man named Driscoll who had known Cross for 20 years, looked at Owen over his glasses. Mr. Marsh, the documentation Mr. Cross has provided suggests otherwise. We'll need to verify the record. He paused. This will go to a formal hearing, 6 weeks. Just like that. Me watched Owen sit back down. Nora had put her hand through his arm, her library book still closed. The room began to shuffle and murmur, and me kept her eyes on the 2 of them, the single dad and the 9-year-old with her grandfather's eyes, and she thought of Thomas Marsh, who had sat in this same building 40 years ago for a different reason entirely. She wrote it all down. That was her job. The 6 weeks that followed were the kind that settle into a man's bones. Owen worked. He fixed a neighbor's tractor motor, replaced a furnace heat exchanger for a family on Copperfield Road, patched the roof on the Millhaven Baptist Annex for what the pastor could afford, which was not much. He did not talk about the hearing. Nora noticed anyway. On a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks in, she sat on the workbench while Owen cleaned a carburetor and asked him about great-grandpa Thomas. Owen set down the cloth. He thought about it the way careful men think, taking his time, choosing what to keep and what to hold back for later. He was a man who fixed things, Owen said finally. Not just engines, things. Nora considered this. What kind of things? He told me once that he helped a family keep their store open. Owen turned the carburetor in his hands. Long time ago, bad winter. He didn't make a big story of it. Did they know it was him? He said that didn't matter. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then, do you think that kind of thing comes back around? Owen looked at his daughter across the workbench, at Thomas Marsh's eyes looking back at him from her 9-year-old face, and he did not have an answer. "I don't know, Nora, I hope so." He didn't know, then, what was already moving. 3 miles east of Owen's workshop, in a narrow house on Birch Street that smelled of lemon oil and old wood, Margaret Reinhold was 74 years old and reading the Millhaven Courier at her kitchen table. She had read the piece about the River Bend hearing twice. She set her coffee down the second time and did not pick it up again. For a long while she looked at the window, at the bare branches of the tree in her yard, at the gray November sky above Millhaven. Then she went to the hall closet, to the back of the top shelf, to a shoebox she had not opened in more than a decade. Inside it, beneath a photograph of her parents' hardware store and a folded invoice from 1984, was an envelope. The paper inside was still crisp because she had kept it carefully, the way you keep something you know you might one day need. She read it again, though she knew every word. Then she called her granddaughter. Claire Reinhold was 31, a property attorney in the firm Harlan Cross had retained for the corridor project. She was sharp, careful, the kind of young woman who read contracts for pleasure and slept well because she believed the work she did was clean. She had never heard the name Thomas Marsh. When her grandmother read her the letter over the phone, the one Thomas had written in 1984 in his careful block hand, the one that described the handshake arrangement he and Margaret's father had made regarding the East Bend parcel, the one with both signatures and a notary stamp, Claire was quiet for a long time. "Grandma," she said, "why didn't anyone ever?" "Your grandfather was a proud man," Margaret said. "He didn't want it recorded as a debt. Thomas didn't want it recorded as a favor. They shook hands and trusted each other. I kept the letter because that's what I do." Another long silence. "Claire," Margaret said, "that man sitting in that council room, he's Thomas Marsh's grandson. He's got a little girl." She paused. "Your grandfather told me once that a kindness doesn't disappear. It goes into the ground. It waits." Claire drove to Millhaven that Saturday. She sat in her grandmother's kitchen for 4 hours. She left with the letter in a document sleeve and a clear understanding of what she was going to do. The formal foreclosure hearing was on a Thursday morning in early December. Snow had come overnight, a light, early snow that made Millhaven look briefly like something painted on a card. Miss Sutton arrived at the courthouse before 7 to open the clerk's room and arrange the session files. She paused in the empty chamber, looked at the rows of wooden seats, and thought again of Thomas Marsh. Owen arrived with Nora at 8:15. He had told her she didn't have to come, but she had put on her good shoes without being asked, and that was that. They sat in the second row again. Nora had no library book this time. Harlan Cross arrived at 8:50 with 3 associates and the full file. He sat up at the respondent's table with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this before, who expected it to go a certain way. His legal team arranged their folders. One of them, a young woman in a charcoal coat, was not sitting with them. She stood at the back of the gallery, alone, holding a document sleeve. Me noticed her and knew she was the attorney because she had the stillness that legal training gives a person, not calm exactly, but coiled. She was watching Owen Marsh. Driscoll called the session to order. Cross's lead attorney moved through the documentation, the lien history, the assessed value, the corridor timeline. It was thorough and it was practiced. Me wrote every word. Owen listened with his hands flat on his knees and Nora's shoulder against his arm. Driscoll asked if there was any response from the Marsh party. Owen stood. He said again what he had said 6 weeks ago. The lien was paid, he had the stamped receipt. The parcel had been his grandfather's and was now his, and he had no intention of leaving. He said it without a tremor. Me thought, watching him, that Thomas Marsh would have said it the same way. Driscoll looked at his papers. "Mr. Marsh, the record as presented." "I'd like to address the council." The voice came from the back of the gallery. The young woman in the charcoal coat was walking forward. Harlan Cross turned to look at her, and his expression shifted, a small rearrangement, the kind a man makes when something he did not plan for walks into the room. "My name is Claire Reinhold," she said. I was retained by Harlan Cross for the corridor project." She placed the resignation letter on the table in front of the council chairman without ceremony. Then she opened the document sleeve. "I want to enter into the record a letter dated November 14, 1984, between Thomas Henry Marsh and Edwin Reinhold, both of Millhaven, regarding this exact parcel." The letter documents a prior private arrangement, a handshake agreement, witnessed and notarized, that gave the Reinhold family conditional first refusal rights on any sale of the East Bend acreage, in exchange for considerations that Thomas Marsh provided to Edwin Reinhold during the winter of 1983 and 1984. She set the letter on the table. Thomas Marsh kept that arrangement quietly at Edwin Reinhold's request and never recorded a formal lien. As a result, the arrangement does not appear in any of the title searches Mr. Cross commissioned, but the letter is valid, it is notarized, and it establishes that the Marsh family's claim to that parcel is prior and protected. She paused. "My grandmother is Edwin Reinhold's daughter. She kept that letter for 40 years because her father told her to keep it. I am presenting it now because it is the right thing to do." The room was absolutely still. Driscoll picked up the letter. He read it slowly. He passed it to the council member beside him. Miss Sutton kept writing, but she was watching Owen. He had not moved. His hands were still flat on his knees, and Nora was looking up at him with her great-grandfather's eyes, waiting for whatever came next. Harlan Cross said something to his remaining attorney in a low voice. The attorney gathered the file folders. Cross stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the chamber without speaking to the council. The door swung shut behind him with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. The council took 11 minutes, unanimous. The deed was restored to Owen Marsh. Driscoll read the motion aloud, signed it, and passed it to me to file. She stamped it twice, the same as always, and thought about the woman behind the county desk who had stamped Owen's lien receipt 4 years ago, and the notary who had stamped Thomas Marsh's letter 40 years ago, and how many quiet acts of faithfulness it took to hold a thing together across that much time. Outside the courthouse the snow had stopped. Claire Reinhold was on the steps, her breath visible in the cold air. Owen came out with Nora at his side, the restored deed in his hand, and he stopped when he saw her. "Your grandfather," he said. "And yours," she said. They stood there for a moment in the thin December light, the single dad with the restored deed in his hand and his daughter at his side, and the young attorney who had put her career at risk for a letter she'd never seen until 3 weeks ago. There wasn't much to say. The kind that mattered had already been said 40 years ago, in block handwriting on a piece of paper that a careful woman had kept in a shoebox on the top shelf of a hall closet. Nora tugged Owen's sleeve. "Dad," she said quietly, "Grandpa Thomas knew, didn't he?" It wasn't a question. Owen looked down at her, then at the deed, then at the river bend just visible past the courthouse elms, 2.5 acres of cold ground and one old workshop with a tire swing. "Yeah," he said, "I think he did." Miss Sutton came out last, locking up the clerk's room behind her. She paused on the steps and looked at the 3 of them, Owen Marsh, his daughter, and the Reinhold granddaughter, and she made a note in the margin of her session record that no one would ever need to read, because she was the kind of woman who wrote things down whether anyone needed them or not. She wrote Thomas Marsh, 40 years it held. Then she walked home through the snow.